After a decade and a half of business in the UK, I came back to Georgia and discovered my daughter working as a maid in the $4 million property I'd left her. She appeared prematurely aged and struggled to recall me. I quietly dialed my lawyer and said 4 words. The outcome shocked them. Imagine walking back into the opulent mansion you built with your own hands, the one you gifted your daughter, only to find her on her knees, scrubbing floors, looking utterly broken. What if your own flesh and blood didn't even recognize you? That's exactly what happened to me, Odora Hayes, and let me tell you, that moment ripped through me like nothing else. I mean, the first thing I saw wasn't my custom-built home or the sunlight dancing on the marble. It was a woman, my daughter, on her knees, mopping, like her bones had just given up on holding her together. Her arms shook with every single stroke. Her shirt was plastered to her back, soaked with sweat. Her hair was just tied up, tired, like nobody in that house cared if she even looked human anymore. The gray bucket beside her, the water in it was the color of old grief. I stepped inside, letting the heavy door ease shut behind me. The security system gave its cheerful little chime. You know, one of those details rich people notice, but abusers just ignore. And nobody, not a single soul, looked up. Not Derek, sprawled across my white sectional with the confidence of a man who'd never earned $1 in his life. Not his mother, Patrice, reclining like she owned the very air. Not even the woman mopping. Not at first. Move that bucket, Patrice snapped, flicking her wrist like she was swatting a fly. You're dripping too close to my shoes. My daughter jolted, grabbed the bucket, and slid it just an inch. Just an inch. Like she knew even that tiny movement could cost her something. And that was the moment she finally looked at me. Her eyes, God help me, those eyes were empty. Not tired, not stressed, empty. Like someone had reached inside her and scraped away anything that made her a person. My breath caught in my throat because those eyes, they belonged to my daughter, to Kiera. She didn't speak. She didn't gasp. She didn't run to me or smile or break down. She squinted, like she was trying to remember me from somewhere far, far away. Like I was a name she used to know but had misplaced. A face she hadn't earned permission to recognize. My own child did not know me. And the worst part? Derek and Patrice didn't care enough to even turn their heads. Derek snapped his fingers, sharp and commanding, and Kiera flinched so hard the mop clattered. If you're still with me, if this moment hits any place in you that remembers what it feels like to see your child diminished, drop a small heart in the comments. So I know I'm not standing in this memory alone. I forced myself forward, my suitcase wheels clicking against the tile. Only then did Patrice glance my way. Can we help you? She asked, totally uninterested, like I was some delivery driver who'd overstayed. Kiera's gaze followed mine, her breathing shallow, shoulders trembling. I watched her mouth open just a little, like a name might come, but she closed it again. Too scared, too conditioned, too broken. 15 years of hard work in the UK, building an empire, and this was what I returned to. Not luxury, not pride, not the life I hoped my daughter was living, but a stranger mopping a floor she already owned. And the people sitting above her? They thought I'd walk in quietly. They thought I'd leave quietly. They thought the woman on her knees belonged to them. My fingers tightened around my phone. Not shaking, not hesitant, just cold with purpose. I stepped toward the tall window where the signal was strongest, turned just enough so they could all hear me, and dialed the only number I needed in that moment. When the line clicked open, I didn't even need to breathe before speaking. My voice sliced clean through the room. Open the contingency file. Kiera blinked at me, the way people blink when they wake up in someone else's house. Her eyes moved across my face slowly, searching for a name to attach to the features in front of her. I watched her pupils drag from my forehead down to my mouth, then back to my eyes, like she was flipping through a dusty drawer in her mind that she hadn't opened in years. For a second, something flickered there, recognition trying to climb up through exhaustion, but it fell back down before it could reach the surface. I ended the call and slipped my phone into my bag, keeping my gaze on her. The last words I'd said into that line still sat in the air between us, like a quiet threat no one understood but me. I set my suitcase against the wall and walked toward her, slow and careful, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt or break if startled. The mop was still in her hands, strands dripping dirty water onto the tile around her knees. I stopped just in front of her and lowered myself down, my old joints protesting, but I didn't let that show on my face. Kiera, I said softly. Her name felt strange in my mouth, like something I'd been repeating to myself in hotel rooms and airports and office corridors overseas, then suddenly heard out loud in the wrong place. Her whole body flinched, not from surprise at my voice, but with a sharp, instinctive jerk, the way a child reacts when they learn certain sounds are followed by pain. Her grip tightened on the mop handle, her head dipped chin to chest. She did not look me in the eye. Behind us, Patrice let out a light, mocking chuckle. She gets tired, she said. her words floating forward like air freshener over a trash can. She likes keeping busy. Don't mind her. That laugh put a splinter under my fingernails. But I kept my focus on Kiera. Up close, the details hit me harder. The skin around her mouth was cracked and dry, the corners pulled tight from clenching her jaw. Fine lines had settled across her forehead, the kind that come from frowning in the dark with no one there to see it. A strand of hair had slipped loose from her tie and stuck to the side of her neck, damp with sweat. I reached up slowly, offering my hand, not touching her, just placing it in the air between us. "Look at me, baby," I whispered. The word baby slipped out before I could stop it. 15 years is a long time to be gone, but it is not long enough to retrain a mother's tongue. Her shoulders twitched. Her eyes lifted just enough to brush past my face, like she had been taught that direct eye contact was a kind of rebellion. Up close, I saw it. The faint yellowed shadow at the edge of her jaw. The dark smudge along her forearm where the sleeve of her shirt had ridden up. I let my gaze travel down, careful, not rushing. Near her wrist, right where the fabric ended, a bruise bloomed under her brown skin, half-hidden, oval and ugly. There were older marks, too, faded at the edges, but still there, layered like a memory someone tried and failed to erase. My heart did a slow, controlled crack, not the kind that sends a woman wailing, the kind that sharpens every thought. "That's enough cleaning for now," Derek said from the sofa, his tone flat. "You're making the floor too wet." He spoke about her like she was a tool he owned, like she had no ears of her own. Kiera didn't answer. She pushed the mop back into the bucket, fingers trembling just enough for me to see. The water sloshed. Patrice made a small noise of annoyance at the splash but didn't move her feet. I shifted a little closer to my daughter, close enough to smell the mix of cheap detergent and sweat clinging to her clothes. "Kiera?" I tried again, my voice even lower. "It's me." Her eyes flicked up quickly, then away just as fast. A flash passed across them. Pain, shame, something tangled. Her breath hitched. The muscles in her throat worked around words that would not come. I could see it. The war happening inside her between the instinct to recognize me and the fear of what that recognition might cost. If you're still listening to me and you have ever watched someone you love swallow their own truth to survive, just leave a small heart in the comments. So I know I'm not talking into the dark alone. "Don't distract her," Patrice said, stretching her legs out a little, toes nearly touching the wet patch on the floor. "She gets behind when people stand over her like that." The way she said people carried the kind of cold that did not need volume. Derek clicked his tongue once, impatience leaking through. "You heard my mother," he said. "Finish up and take the bucket back where it belongs." Her mother. The words lodged in my chest like a stone. I did not argue that point. Not yet. Instead, I watched Kiera's hand move. She pulled her sleeve down over the bruise in a quick, practiced motion, as if she had done it 1,000 times in mirrors and hallways and doorways where someone might notice. My gaze met hers for a heartbeat. This time she held it just barely. No welcome there, only fear and something close to apology. Her lips parted. When she spoke, her voice was scraped raw and thin, like it had been used to say sorry more than anything else. "Please," she whispered, the word breaking on her tongue. "Don't get me in trouble." I stood up from beside Kiera and turned fully toward the couch, toward the two people who had made themselves comfortable in a life they did not build. Derek lounged there like a man on a throne, one hand resting on the back of the sofa, the other still holding the remote. His shoulders were spread wide, legs apart, taking up space that didn't belong to him. Patrice sat with her ankles crossed, robe tied loose at the waist, chin slightly lifted as if the air in that room answered to her. They looked like they were posing for a picture that would never be developed, frozen in a confidence that came from never being told no in a language they respected. I had seen them like this before, just not this close. In the early years, when Kiera still sent the occasional photo overseas, they were always somewhere in the background, at the edge of birthday parties, at the end of a sofa, near a grill in someone's backyard. Patrice with that same tilt to her head, Derek with that same lazy sprawl. I used to pinch and zoom on my phone screen, studying them from hotel beds in London, from rented apartments in Manchester, telling myself I would get to know them properly when the work slowed down. Now here I was, standing in front of the full picture, and they were behaving as if I was a stranger wandering through a showroom. Neither of them moved when I stepped closer. They did not stand to greet me, did not say my name, did not show even the thin politeness people give a guest they didn't invite. Derek finally clicked the TV off. Not because I had arrived, but because he wanted silence without commercials. "You done staring?" he asked, eyes sliding to me like I was another bill in his mail stack. His voice carried a bored edge, like this moment was an interruption in a day he believed he controlled. Patrice shifted slightly, tightening her robe, adjusting the belt with small, precise fingers. Her rings caught the light, stones glinting. I recognized the pattern on one of her bracelets. It matched a set Kiera and I had looked at once in a catalog years back, something my daughter had called too fancy for herself, and laughed off. Seeing it on Patrice's wrist settled something heavy in my stomach. I let my gaze move between them, then past them, taking in the room. The cushions bore the slight sag of long use. A pair of slippers I didn't recognize sat neatly under the coffee table. A folded blanket was draped over the back of a chair in the corner. These were the marks of people who lived here, not visitors. Meanwhile, my daughter's presence was marked only by the bucket by the door and the wet streaks on the floor. She stood off to the side now, head bowed, mop held close to her body like a shield that didn't work. When I looked at her again, I saw more than tiredness. Her shoulders sloped forward in a way they never used to, as if gravity had been instructed to press harder on her alone. Her arms hung close to her sides, elbows tucked in, taking up as little space as possible. The skin around her eyes carried the dull gray tint of someone who had been sleeping in snatches instead of full nights. None of that happened overnight. It took time and neglect to carve a person down to that. "Is there something you need?" Patrice asked me finally, her tone smooth but hard underneath. "We don't do walk-ins. You can speak to Derek if you're here about the house." She spoke about the house like it was a separate entity they managed, not a gift I had placed directly into my daughter's hands. My lips pressed together for a second. I felt the weight of every year I had spent signing foreign contracts, while assuming my only child was safe inside walls I paid for. "I know my way around this property," I said, my voice low. "I signed the papers." Derek let out a short breath. That wasn't quite a laugh. 15 years ago, he answered. "Things change. People grow up. People move on." He nodded in Kiera's direction without looking at her. "She gave us the house. You stay gone too long." The words landed without apology. No one rushed to soften them. Kiera's fingers tightened on the mop handle, the knuckles whitening. She didn't contradict him. She didn't lift her head. Her silence sat between us, heavy and trained. He wanted me to hear the accusation buried in what he said, that my absence was a permission slip, that my distance made their takeover legitimate. I let the first wave of guilt roll through me and break, without showing on my face. I had my own reckoning to do with the years I had chosen work over front porch visits and Sunday dinners. But I refused to let him turn my mistakes into his justification. I took one more slow look at my daughter, at the way her body stood half-turned toward him even when he wasn't addressing her, like a dog listening for the next command. Then I brought my eyes back to Derek and Patrice. My voice, when it came, was soft enough that they had to lean in slightly to catch the words. "Did she give it?" I asked, letting each syllable sit on the air. "Or was it taken?" Derek's mouth curved in a slow, humorless smile when I asked my question. He didn't answer me right away. Men like him enjoy the pause. They like the way silence makes their next move feel bigger. He leaned forward, set the remote carefully on the glass table, and pushed himself up from the couch with the ease of someone who never scrubbed a single tile in this house. "You want to talk about giving and taking?" he said. "Fine." He adjusted his shirt, smoothing the front like he was about to make a presentation instead of defend a theft. Then he walked past me, not around, close enough that his shoulder brushed mine on purpose. It was a small contact, but it carried a message. "I am not afraid of you." He crossed the room to the built-in cabinet along the far wall, the one where I used to keep family photo albums and the good table linen. Now, when he opened the door, there were no albums, just a stack of folders and a metal lockbox sitting where memories used to live. He crouched, pulled the box out, and set it on top of the cabinet. The sound of the metal hitting the wood echoed a little in the room. Kiera stiffened at the noise, her fingers tightening on the mop handle again. Patrice watched with idle curiosity, like she'd seen this show before. Derek pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked the box. The click of the tumblers falling into place sounded louder than it should have. He lifted the lid and rifled through papers, fingers practiced, until he found what he wanted. When he turned back to me, he was holding a manila folder, edges worn from being handled too often. "You don't have to take my word for it," he said, his tone carrying a smug softness. "We like to do things properly around here." He walked back, slow and controlled, and dropped the folder on the glass table between us. The flap opened just enough for a stack of documents to peek out, crisp white against the brown. "Go ahead," he added, gesturing with a little flick of his hand. "You like signing things. You'll appreciate the paperwork." I didn't reach for it immediately. I watched him instead. Watched the way he stood just a little too straight, shoulders pulled back, chin up. This was a performance for him, a moment he had rehearsed in his mind, the day he could hold his supposed proof in front of the woman who funded the life he now claimed. Finally, I stepped forward and opened the folder. The top page was a copy of the deed. My eyes went first to the heading, then to the address I knew by heart, then down toward the line where the signatures lived. Derek shifted just a fraction, like he wanted to hover over my shoulder, but thought better of it. I let my gaze settle on Kiera's name. The letters were familiar, but the way they sat on the line was all wrong. Her handwriting used to flow smooth and steady, loops open, strokes even. The signature on that page shook. The first letter started strong, then dipped, the tail of it dragging lower than it should. The next letters bunched together like they were holding on to each other, trying not to fall off the edge of the document. There was a tremor in the ink itself, tiny stops and starts where the pen had hesitated. That was not the handwriting of a woman sitting comfortably at a kitchen table, making a decision with a clear head. That was the mark of someone whose hand had been guided by fear. Behind me, Patrice shifted again, the rustle of her robe filling the quiet. "You see," she said lightly, "everything is in order. If you're listening to this and you've ever seen a piece of paper tell a truth someone's mouth refused to speak, just leave a little heart in the comments. So I know you understand what I saw on that page." I didn't respond to Patrice. I kept studying the signature, letting silence do the work. The notary stamp sat near the bottom, neat and official, the kind of seal that makes people stop asking questions. I took in the date. It was a day I remembered for something else entirely. An email from Kiera that never came, a call she missed and then never returned. Back then, I had told myself she was busy, that marriage and business and life were pulling her in different directions. Now, standing in that room, I realized what else had been happening while I was smoothing over my disappointment with excuses. "You handed her everything?" Derek said suddenly, breaking into my thoughts. His voice had settled into that comfortable arrogance again. "And she handed it to me. That's how this works. You pass the torch. She chooses who carries it. That's family." I lifted my head slowly and looked at him. On the surface, I kept my face calm, features arranged in the same polite interest I wore in boardrooms when men tried to talk over me with half the information. But inside, something narrowed. My eyes sharpened, focusing not just on him, but on the pattern behind his words. The way he positioned himself as the natural next step. The way he turned my absence into his permission slip. Kiera stood in my peripheral vision, pressed to the side of the room like part of the wall. Her shoulders had crept up toward her ears, her body folding inward. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't reach for the documents with her own name on them. My phone buzzed in my bag, the sound cutting clean through the heavy air. I didn't look away from Derek as I reached down and slid it out, glancing at the screen. One short message from my lawyer sat there, clear and simple. Asterisk, I'm 10 minutes away. Don't leave. Asterisk, I closed the folder and let it rest on the table like something that might stain my hands if I touched it any longer. My phone, still warm from the message, sat in my palm. 10 minutes. That was all I needed to buy. 10 minutes of truth before other people started writing reports about my child's life. I slipped the phone into my bag and turned back toward Kiera. She hadn't moved from her spot near the wall. Her eyes were on the floor, on the damp trail left by the mop, as if staring at it hard enough might make her disappear into it. "Come with me," I said softly. I didn't wait for permission. I walked over and gently touched her elbow, the way you touch a glass that looks like it might crack if you press too hard. Her skin was warm under my fingers, too warm for someone who had been working in a cooled house. She flinched at the contact, a small shake running through her arm, but she didn't pull away. I guided her toward the far corner of the room, away from the couch, away from the cabinet with the lockbox. Patrice made a disapproving sound under her breath, but didn't bother to get up. Derek settled back into his seat, one eye on the TV screen he'd turned off, the other pretending not to watch us. In the corner, the light shifted. The angle of the window cast us half in shadow, half in sun, close enough to be seen if someone wanted to look, far enough for them to pretend they weren't listening. I turned so my back was to the rest of the room, placing my body between Kiera and the eyes on the couch. "You're burning up," I murmured, keeping my voice low. "How long have you been sick?" Her lips pressed together. For a moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Then her shoulders sagged. Tiny surrender. "It was bad last year," she whispered. The words scraped out of her throat, fragile and frayed. "Fever. Cough." I couldn't stand up for long. Her gaze darted past me, checking the room, then dropped back to the patch of floor between us. "That's when he took them." "Took what?" I asked, even though my mind was already moving ahead of her words, lining up the documents I had just seen with the timing she was describing. "The papers." Her fingers jumped nervously against the mop handle. "He said he needed to keep them safe." I was too weak to argue. I was on the couch and he stood over me with a pen. He said if anything happened to him, I'd be the one left with nothing unless we changed things. I didn't want to sign. She swallowed, the movement tight and painful. He said I was being ungrateful, that he and his mother were the ones taking care of me every day, that it was only fair they had security. I couldn't breathe, right? I just wanted him to stop shouting. If you're listening to me and you have ever watched your child agree to something out of fear instead of choice, drop a small heart in the comments. So, I know I'm not the only one whose stomach has learned the weight of that kind of guilt. So you signed? I said quietly. It wasn't a question. Her eyes shone, but no tears fell. I tried not to, she said. My hand was shaking. I told him we should wait, that you should be here for anything important. He said you were gone, living your new life. And I needed to stop acting like a little girl waiting on her mother to fix everything. Each word hit me like a separate blow, but I let them land. I needed the full shape of this, not a softened version. He held my wrist. Her voice dropped lower. He pressed the pen into my fingers. He said, if I loved him, I would prove it. The air in the corner thickened. My heart broke all over again. But the cracks were different now. Cleaner. Sharper. What else, Kiera? I asked. Tell me the rest. After that, she continued. He put the papers in that box. He told me if I ever tried to go behind his back about the house, he'd have me out on the street by morning. He said my name wasn't on anything that mattered anymore. She gave a humorless, tiny laugh that died as soon as it left her mouth. He knows I don't have anywhere to go. I sold. She cut herself off abruptly, biting down on the rest of the sentence, as if something inside warned her not to open that door yet. He told me if I pushed him, I'd lose everything. The house, my place. Even. Her eyes flicked again toward the rest of the room, then back to me. He said a wife who doesn't obey doesn't deserve a home. My fingers curled into my palms. I unclenched them slowly. And the floors? I asked, my voice steady. Why are you this tired? A flush of shame crept up her neck. He doesn't like seeing streaks, she said. If he wakes up and the floors aren't shining, he doesn't talk to me for days. Or he slams doors, walks heavy on purpose. Sometimes he throws things in the sink for me to clean. It's easier if I just keep them spotless. I barely sleep. I just keep moving. Her voice by then was barely a breath. Hollowed out, the edges worn down by repetition. The three truths hung between us. He took the documents when she was too sick to fight. He threatened to throw her out. And he turned her nights into unpaid, terrified labor to keep his temper quiet. Heartbreak rose in me like a tide, but I refused to drown in it. Grief wouldn't save her. Strategy might. In that corner, something in me shifted. The guilt that had sat heavy on my chest since I walked through the door pushed to the side, making room for something colder, clearer. I was not just a mother who had come home too late. I was a woman who knew how to turn signatures and threats into evidence. I lifted my hand and touched Kiera's arm lightly, not flinching at the heat of her skin. You're not crazy, I said softly, and you're not weak. You were cornered. Her eyes filled again, but she held herself still, like crying might earn her another punishment. From behind me, across the tiles of that sitting room, I heard it. The heavy, deliberate sound of boots approaching. Not the light shuffle of someone passing through, but the stomp of a man who had realized he'd let his wife talk for too long. The sound of his boots barely finished crossing the last tile before his hand was on the mop. Derek didn't ask, didn't clear his throat, didn't warn. He just reached between us and ripped the handle out of Kiera's fingers with a hard, twisting pull that made her stumble. The wet head of it slapped against the bucket, sending a little spray of dirty water onto her bare ankles. Break time's over, he said, not even glancing at me. You're behind. His tone was flat, the kind of flat that came from long practice. He turned the mop upright and shoved it back toward her chest like a weapon returned to its owner. Kiera's hands came up automatically, muscles conditioned, catching the handle before it hit her. Her eyes darted between his face and mine, panic pulling tight at the corners of her mouth. She opened her lips as if to explain, then closed them again when she saw his jaw clench. She started talking. He cut in. You were just talking when there's still work to do. He swung his gaze to me then, finally acknowledging that I existed. Up close, I could see the thin line of irritation in his forehead, the small pulse beating at his temple. Not fear, annoyance. Ma'am, he added, the word pressed through clenched teeth. I didn't realize we were holding a conference over here. Patrice let out a small laugh from the couch, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. She tucked her feet up under her as if she were getting comfortable for a show. I did not step back. I did not apologize. I shifted my body just enough to put myself between him and Kiera, my hand resting lightly at my side. Not touching her, but close enough that she would feel I had not moved away. She's been on her knees since before I walked in, I said quietly. She can sit for a moment. You don't run this house, Derek replied. The easy charm he probably used on neighbors and church members slipped off his face like a mask thrown on the table. What sat beneath was something harder, smaller. You dropped your keys and your money here years ago and went chasing your dreams overseas. That doesn't give you the right to stroll back in and disrupt how things are done. His voice rose slightly on the last words, but not enough to be called shouting. This was how he liked to do his damage, just under the line of what other people might call abuse if they heard it out of context. I saw Kiera's shoulders fold in more, watched her eyes hit the floor again. The mop handle trembled against her fingers. "Derek," Patrice said mildly, "don't get worked up. She's just adjusting." The word adjusting hung in the air like a bad perfume. He snorted, never taking his eyes off me. "I'm calm," he said. "I'm just setting a boundary." He took a half-step closer. The scent of his cologne hit me, heavy and sharp, trying to cover up the sour note of sweat that floated around all the hard surfaces in the room. "This is my house," he said slowly, as if explaining something to a stubborn child. "My roof, my decisions. You're a guest here, Odora. Don't confuse that." My name in his mouth felt like an insult. Behind me, I could feel Kiera shrinking back, as if she might fold herself small enough to slide into the corner behind the curtains. I met his stare and held it. Years of sitting across from men in suits who thought my accent and my gender meant they could talk me into a cheaper deal had given me practice. This was a different battlefield, but the opponent was familiar. I let my face stay smooth. No raised brows, no tight lips. Only my eyes changed, narrowing the way they did when I redefined print on a contract. "You're right about one thing," I said. "I did leave. I went where I had to go to build what needed building. I stayed too long. That's on me." I let those words settle because they were true, and truth has its own weight. Then I leaned in just enough that he had to decide whether to lean back or stand there and let my presence sit in his face. He chose the latter, jaw tightening another notch. "But you are wrong about this roof," I added, my voice dropping low, so only the three of us in that corner could fully hear it. "You are living inside a decision that was never yours to claim." His nostrils flared. "You gave her everything?" he repeated, like a man reciting his favorite scripture. "She handed it to me. That makes it mine. End of story." He liked that line. He had probably used it in this room before. I studied him for a long breath, taking in the slight sheen of sweat at his hairline, the vein jumping near his neck, the way his hand flexed once around nothing, wanting to grip something. I thought of the signature on that deed, the dates, the tremor in the ink, the fever Kiera had described, the way her hand had been held down. My heartbeat, which had been a wild drum when I first walked into this mansion, settled into something steady, almost frighteningly calm. "No," I said finally. "Not end of story." The air tightened between us. Patrice shifted again on the couch, her robe rustling. Somewhere deeper in the house, a pipe knocked faintly as water moved through it. Outside, a car rolled past, tires crunching softly over gravel. I saw the moment a flicker of uncertainty tried to creep up the back of Derek's neck. He pushed it down fast. "You need to leave," he said, his tone dropping an octave. "Today. I'm not going to have you come in here, turning my wife against me, stirring up old things. This is my house. I won't say it again." I let the words hang there, not rushing to reply. Then I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and looked him dead in the eyes. "Not for long," I told him. The words came out level. No shout, no tremor. Just a quiet statement from a woman who had already set things in motion. A beat later, from the direction of the front door, a firm, heavy knock echoed through the house. The knock sounded again, harder this time, carrying through the walls and into the silent space Derek had tried to own. He turned his head toward the door, a frown cutting across his face. Patrice shifted on the couch, irritation tightening her mouth. Kiera barely moved, but I felt her breath catch behind me. "Who's that?" Patrice muttered. "We're not expecting anyone." Derek hesitated just long enough to show he didn't like surprises. Then he squared his shoulders and walked toward the foyer. I stayed where I was for a heartbeat, listening. The front door opened with a soft creak. I heard a man's voice, steady and clipped. "Afternoon. DeKalb County Sheriff's Office. We're looking for Derek Wells and Patrice Wells." He didn't shout. He didn't sound angry. That made it more dangerous. Calm men with badges rarely come without purpose. I moved closer to the archway leading into the foyer, stopping just before stepping fully into view. From there I could see enough. 2 deputies stood on the front step, uniforms sharp, boots clean, hats low against the sun outside. One held a stack of sealed envelopes in his left hand, the white edges pressing against his fingers. The other had a small notepad tucked into his chest pocket, pen clipped neatly beside it. Their presence changed the air in the house. It felt heavier and cleaner at the same time. Derek braced a hand on the edge of the door, blocking half the opening with his body. "That's me," he said. "This is my mother. What's this about?" He tipped his head toward Patrice, who had risen from the couch and now hovered a few steps behind him. Her robe tied tighter. She put a hand on his arm, trying to make it look casual. We haven't done anything, she added quickly. There must be a mistake. The nearest deputy didn't take a step back. He just glanced at her, then back at Derek. We'll explain, he said. But we need to come in. This concerns your residence. The word residence seemed to prick Derek's pride. His jaw flexed. You can explain it right here, he answered. My wife doesn't like strangers coming into her home. I stepped forward, then into the frame of the archway. Let them in, I said calmly. It is my home they're standing in, and I'd like to hear what they came to say. The deputy's gaze flicked to me, assessing. He took in the suitcase by the wall, the mop, the bucket, Kiara's small frame pressed near the corner, Patrice's tight face and robe. He didn't let his surprise show, but I could tell he was collecting details, stacking them silently. If you're listening to me now and you've ever watched authority walk into a room where people thought they would never be challenged, just put a little heart down below. So, I know you understand that strange mix of fear and relief. Derek shot me a look over his shoulder, hot and sharp, but he moved aside anyway. Pride bends differently when uniforms are involved. The deputies stepped inside. The taller one closed the door gently behind him, then turned so he could face all of us at once. Mr. Wells, Mrs. Wells? He began, nodding first at Derek, then at Patrice. We're here to serve you with an order issued this afternoon by the county court. Patrice's hand tightened on Derek's arm. I told you we haven't done anything, she said, voice rising. We pay our taxes. We mind our business. Ma'am, the deputy replied. You'll have a chance to respond. Right now, our job is to present this and make you aware of what it means. He unfolded the top envelope, careful not to tear the paper, and pulled out a document. He didn't hand it over yet. He read first. This order places a temporary freeze on all property-related actions regarding this residence. He recited, eyes moving steadily across the page. It also initiates an investigation into suspected coercion, intimidation, and possible forced servitude occurring within these walls. The words dropped into the room one by one, heavy as stones in a still pond. Kiara's head snapped up. I saw her eyes widen, confusion and terror fighting for space. Patrice's mouth fell open, then snapped shut, then opened again like a fish gasping in shallow water. Forced servitude? She repeated, scandal and fear braided together. That's ridiculous. She's family. The deputy glanced toward Kiara just for a moment, then back at the paper. We're not here to argue the details, he said. We're here to make sure nothing changes about ownership or occupancy until the investigation is complete. No selling, no transferring, no evicting. At that, Derek's eyes sliced toward me. Something ugly moved across his face, a shadow passing behind his stare. The second deputy stepped forward and extended the document. You're both named on the order, he said. We're required to read the key parts to you and confirm you received it. Derek snatched the paper, scanning it too fast to take in much. His nostrils flared. Patrice leaned over his arm, trying to read along, her fingers digging into his bicep. Who started this? She demanded. Who told you anything was wrong here? Neither deputy answered her. They didn't need to. The silence said enough. I stayed by the archway, hands folded loosely in front of me, heart steady. This was only the first crack, but it was a deep one. The foundation they had been standing on for years had just been marked, measured, and tagged for inspection. Derek finally lifted his head from the paper and turned fully toward me. The calm he'd worn like a jacket earlier had slipped off. His eyes were hot now, narrow and dark. His lips pressed into a hard line. He stared at me like he could climb out of his situation by sheer anger. You think this changes anything? He snarled. He spat the words at me like they were supposed to burn. Before I could answer, the sound of another car door shutting floated in from outside. A moment later, the doorbell rang. Just once, crisp and short. The deputies exchanged a quick look. One of them turned toward the foyer. Expecting someone else, ma'am? He asked me. Yes, I said, my attorney. I didn't take my eyes off Derek when I answered. He laughed under his breath, a low, mocking sound. You really think some paper is going to undo what's already done? He said. You're late, Odora. We live here. That's the reality. Patrice straightened her robe again, like it was armor, lifting her chin. And we've taken care of Kiara all these years, she added, her voice sliding into something that tried to sound wounded. This is an attack on our family. The deputy at the door opened it. My lawyer stepped in with a kind of calm you only get from decades of walking into rooms where people don't want to see you. Gray at his temples now, briefcase in hand. His suit a soft navy that didn't shout, but commanded attention all the same. He took in the scene. Deputies. Derek's rigid stance. Patrice's tightened jaw. Kiara in the corner. Me near the archway, and gave a small nod in my direction. Miss Hayes, he said. Forgive the delay. The judge wanted to see every page before he signed. He moved past Derek without brushing against him, headed straight for the coffee table. The manila folder Derek had waved earlier still sat there, edges skewed. My lawyer set his briefcase down beside it, clicked it open, and pulled out a thicker, older file. The cardboard edges were worn, the tab marked with my last name in ink that had faded slightly with time. Seeing it again after all those years felt like watching a version of myself from long ago walk into the room. "What is this supposed to be?" Derek asked, trying to sound unimpressed. "Another stack of accusations?" My lawyer didn't rise to the bait. He opened the file with careful fingers and fanned the contents out on the glass surface. The room seemed to lean in. On top lay the original deed, the one I had signed before I ever boarded a plane out of Georgia. Back when Kiera's laughter still filled these rooms. Behind it, another document and another, each bearing my signature, his signature, dates that marched in order. "This," my lawyer said evenly, "is the record of how this house was acquired. And this," he tapped the second page, "is the agreement you and I put in place before you relocated, Miss Hayes." He slanted a glance my way, then returned his eyes to the deputies. "At her instruction, we included specific protections." One of the deputies stepped closer, resting his hands lightly on his belt as he looked down at the table. The other took out his notepad, pen hovering, listening. Patrice edged nearer, peering at the papers like they might suddenly rearrange themselves into something more favorable if she stared hard enough. "I don't see how that matters now," she said. "The house is in Derek's name. We have his paperwork." My lawyer reached for the deed Derek had pulled from his own folder earlier and laid it beside ours. Two versions of the same story side by side. "What matters," he said, "is which set of documents carries legal weight. This property was purchased solely by Miss Hayes. She transferred it to her daughter under very specific conditions. And in this contingency agreement," he slid another page forward, the paper soft from having been handled many times, "she reserved certain rights in case anything ever threatened her daughter's well-being or the integrity of the transfer." I remembered sitting in his office all those years ago, the air cool and quiet, as we talked through worst-case scenarios I'd believed would never happen. He had asked me, "Are you sure you want to think this far ahead?" And I'd said yes, because loving somebody means signing for storms even when the sky looks clear. "What conditions?" one of the deputies asked. My lawyer pointed to a paragraph midway down the page. The lines dense, the words precise. "Here," he said in plain language, "it states that any transfer, sharing, or surrender of this property made under intimidation, coercion, manipulation, or abuse, physical or emotional, will be considered invalid. In that event, ownership reverts to its prior state pending investigation." For a moment, nobody spoke. I watched the meaning of those words travel across faces. The deputy's brows lowered slightly. The one with the notepad wrote something down. Derek's lips thinned. Patrice's color changed first. The flush that had risen in her cheeks when the deputies arrived drained away, leaving the skin around her mouth a chalky, uneven shade. Her eyes flicked to Kiera, then back to the documents, then to me. "That doesn't prove anything," she said, but the edge in her voice had dulled. "If you have ever seen somebody realize that the trap they set for someone else might just close on them instead, you know that silence that comes right before they start scrambling. Drop a heart in the comments if you've watched that shift happen." My lawyer folded his hands loosely in front of him. "On its own, this contingency agreement is just words on paper," he said. "But in context with the property freeze, with the questionable signature Mr. Wells produced, with Miss Hayes' account of what she found when she returned, it becomes something else." One of the deputies nodded slowly. "Especially paired with visible signs of distress," he added, his gaze sliding toward Kiera. She shrank back from the attention, fingers twisting in the hem of her shirt. Derek stiffened. "She's fine," he snapped. "She's tired, that's all. You can't come in here and throw around words like coercion because her mama's feelings are hurt." The deputy closest to him straightened a fraction. "Sir," he said, his tone cooling, "right now we're not making conclusions. We're noting concerns. And between what we've seen, what's written here, and the conditions outlined in this agreement." He glanced back at my lawyer, who gave a single small nod. The lawyer's voice stayed measured, but there was steel under it now. "Deputies," he said, "we have reason to suspect abuse occurred here." For a moment after my lawyer spoke, the room held its breath. The words suspect abuse don't just sit on top of the air. They sink down into it and change the way everybody moves. One of the deputies cleared his throat softly, then turned his full attention to Kiera. He didn't crowd her. He took a slow step in her direction, hands still resting on his belt. Voice lowered. "Ma'am," he said, "can I speak with you for a second?" Kiera froze, her fingers clenched at the hem of her shirt, twisting the fabric. Her eyes flicked to Derek, then to Patrice, then to me, like she was trying to decide which pair of eyes held the least danger. She's tired. Patrice cut in a little too quickly. She doesn't need all the stress. We've told you there's been a misunderstanding. The deputy didn't look at her. Ma'am, he repeated gently to my daughter. Nobody's forcing you, but I need to ask, are you hurt anywhere? Have you been harmed in this house? Derek let out a rough laugh. Oh, come on, he said. This is ridiculous. She's clumsy, that's all. She bumps into things. Then her mama flies in from overseas and suddenly everyone's calling it abuse. Y'all are being used. The second deputy shifted his weight just enough to remind Derek he wasn't running this conversation. We're just asking questions, he said. She can answer for herself. Kiara's throat bobbed. I could see her chest rising faster, breath shortening, like her body was trying to pull in enough air for two different answers at once. I took a small step closer, stopping short of touching her. You can tell the truth, I whispered. Eyes on her, not on him. This isn't like before. My voice wasn't loud, but it reached her. Her gaze slid from my face to the deputy's. We would like your permission, he continued, calm and patient, to document any injuries you might have. That just means looking and taking a few photos with your consent. No one can make you say anything you don't want to say. But if something has happened, this is your chance to tell it. The whole house seemed to lean toward her. Even the light through the windows felt like it was waiting. If you're hearing me and you've ever watched somebody you love stand at that edge between silence and confession, just put a small heart in the comments. So, I know you understand how loud a quiet room can feel. Kiara's lips trembled for a heartbeat. She looked like she might deny everything, tuck it all away, pretend the bruises on her body were something she'd invented. Then she let out a sound somewhere between a sigh and a sob and nodded once. Oh, okay, she whispered. The deputy glanced at me. Is there a bedroom or somewhere more private? He asked. Kiara shook her head quickly, panic flashing. No, she said, voice cracking. Here is fine. Please, here. That told me everything I needed to know about what privacy in this house had turned into. The deputy respected her choice. He took one step back to give her space. Whenever you're ready, he said. With hands that shook, Kiara reached for her sleeve. She hesitated once, eyes closing for a second like she had to separate herself from what she was about to reveal. Then she pushed the fabric up, and underneath, her arm told the story her mouth had tried so hard to swallow. Dark blotches bloomed along the forearm and up toward the elbow, some yellowing at the edges, some a harsher purple. Faint straight lines overlapped in places like the imprint of fingers that had gripped too hard. Near her wrist, a round bruise sat like an accusation, the skin slightly swollen. The deputy's jaw tightened. He didn't gasp or swear. His face did something quieter. His eyes hardened. His mouth pressed into a line. The kind of shift you see when a person decides they've crossed from suspicion into certainty. How did you get these? He asked. His tone stayed soft, but now there was steel under it. Kiara swallowed again. Her gaze slid almost against her will toward Derek. His stare bored into her, hot and warning. She flinched and looked away. Her voice failed. She tried again. He says it's discipline. The room went even quieter than before. Who is he? The deputy asked, though he already knew. A tear slipped down one side of her nose, cutting a clean path through the fine dust of fatigue on her skin. My husband, she said, barely audible. He says, I'm his wife. I must obey. The words sounded like they hurt on the way out. Derek scoffed, but it came out strained. I never said that, he snapped. You twist everything. She bruises easy. She's always been sensitive. You people are blowing this way out of... The second deputy cut in. We've heard from you. Now we're hearing from her. My lawyer stood very still, watching, his eyes moving from bruises to faces to documents and back again, mentally stitching the pieces together. Patrice had gone pale, one hand pressed against her mouth, the glamour of her robe and jewelry sitting wrong on her all of a sudden. The first deputy glanced at his partner. They shared a look, short, professional, full of things they didn't say out loud yet. Then a third voice spoke up from near the foyer. I hadn't even heard the additional footsteps, but another officer had come in while all eyes were on Kiara. We'll need to see where she sleeps, he said. For a second, Kiara didn't move. The words, see where she sleeps, seemed to hang over her like a weight, pressing her into the floor. Her fingers loosened on the edge of her shirt, then tightened again. I watched her eyes dart toward the hallway, then toward Derek. The way someone trapped between two doors checks which one is locked. Derek's face hardened. There's no need for that, he snapped. She sleeps in our room, like any wife. You're crossing a line. The new officer, the one who'd asked about her sleeping space, tilted his head slightly. Then it shouldn't be a problem to show us, he replied. It'll only take a minute. Patrice stepped forward, her robe sleeve swinging. You people are unbelievable, she said, trying to sound offended instead of scared. First you accuse us of abuse. Now you want to inspect our bedroom? This is harassment. The first deputy ignored her and kept his gaze on Kiera. Ma'am, he said gently, you don't have to lie for anybody. Show us where you really sleep. Those words, really sleep, seemed to unlock something. Kiera's shoulders sagged. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Okay, she whispered. Her voice was so faint I barely heard it. She set the mop carefully against the wall, as if afraid knocking it over might change someone's mind. Then she turned and started down the hallway, her bare feet whispering against the tile. The officers followed, their boots heavier, echoing. I walked behind them, close enough to see her, far enough not to crowd. Derek trailed at the rear, muttering under his breath. Patrice hovered near him, fingers clutching at his arm. We passed the doorway to the guest room, the one I had decorated myself with soft curtains and a framed print Kiera picked as a teenager. The door was wide open. The bed inside was neatly made, untouched. No indent in the pillow, no extra shoes on the floor. Not there, Kiera said quietly, almost to herself. She kept going. At the end of the hall, she turned left, toward the part of the house that had always been meant for storage. The laundry room, the small utility closet, the space under the staircase where we used to keep Christmas decorations. My chest tightened. She stopped in front of a narrow door with a plain knob, the kind of door most people would walk past without seeing. Her hand hovered over it for a moment. I saw her swallow, then force herself to turn the knob. The door opened inward with a slow, complaining creak. Even before the light from the hallway spilled in, I smelled it. A stale, enclosed scent. Faint mildew threaded with the sour tang of old sweat and cleaning chemicals. The officers stepped closer. Inside, the space was barely wide enough for a grown person to stand upright and stretch their arms without touching both walls. There was no window, no lamp, no soft rug. Just a thin, flattened mattress on the floor, its edges frayed. One corner stained darker than the rest. A single blanket lay crumpled near the foot of it, balled up like it had been kicked off in some restless, cramped sleep. Next to the mattress sat a plastic bucket, clean but unmistakable in its purpose. A small shelf had been rigged up from a piece of scrap wood and two bent brackets. On it sat a bottle of cheap lotion, a folded t-shirt, and a toothbrush in a cracked cup. No pictures, no books, no sign that this was anything but a place to put a body when you were done using its hands. One of the deputies clicked his tongue quietly, a sound of disbelief more than judgment. The other's face went blank. The way lawmen's faces go blank when they are filing something under evidence. You sleep here? The officer near the door asked, though he already knew the answer. Kiera stood just outside the threshold, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to take up even less space than the closet allowed. She nodded. Sometimes I get to lie down on the couch, she said, eyes fixed on the mattress. If I finish everything. Finish what? The second deputy asked. The floors, the ironing, the kitchen, whatever they want. Her voice thinned, flattening under the list. If I'm too slow, he says, I don't deserve a comfortable bed. He says, this is enough for someone who doesn't pull her weight. Derek snorted. It's storage, he said. She crashed there a few nights when she was sick. You're making it sound like a prison. The officer by the door took a slow breath, then reached for the radio clipped to his shoulder. He turned slightly aside, but not so far that we couldn't hear. Dispatch, this is Unit 12 on scene, he said, requesting supervisor at this address. Possible domestic servitude situation. We've got injuries documented and sleeping arrangements that are not consistent with a spouse. Copy. Static crackled for a moment. Then a calm voice answered, Copy, Unit 12. Supervisor en route. Hold position and secure scene. He lowered his hand from the radio, jaw tight. He met my eyes briefly. In that look, I saw what he wasn't allowed to promise out loud yet. Things were shifting. Lines were being drawn. Behind me, I heard Patrice's breath hitch. This is all being twisted, she blurted out, words tumbling over each other. She likes it down there. The supervisor arrived without fanfare, but the shift in the house was immediate. He was older than the other deputies, with lines around his eyes that said he'd heard every version of, we didn't do anything more times than he could count. No raised voice, no swagger, just a quiet authority that settled over the room like a new kind of weather. He listened while Unit 12 gave a quick rundown near the archway. The bruises, the closet, the contingency file, the order from the court. His eyes moved from one face to another, me, Kiera, Derek, Patrice, taking his time, as if he was laying us out on a table in his mind. Then he said 6 words that changed everything. We're going to separate you all. Those words landed hardest on Derek and Patrice. She stiffened, her hand flying to her chest. Separate? She repeated. This is our home. We have nothing to hide. Derek scoffed, but his jaw had gone tight again. This is overkill, he muttered. You're turning a marital disagreement into a crime scene. The supervisor didn't argue. He just gave quick instructions. One deputy led Kiera gently toward the dining area, away from the hall and the closet door that was still open like a wound. Another motioned for me to sit near the far end of the sofa. Derek was asked to stay by the front door. Patrice hovered between rooms until the supervisor himself gestured toward a chair in the corner and said, "Ma'am, right there, please." He started with Kiera. From where I sat, I could only see her profile. The way her hands kept brushing over each other in her lap, fingers restless. His voice stayed low. I caught pieces. "Did anyone ever threaten you? When did you sign? Who was there? What happened before you wrote your name?" Her answers came in fits and starts, but they came. "He said if I didn't, I'd be on the street. He took the papers when I couldn't stand for long. He stood over me. He raised his voice. I just wanted him to stop." I watched the supervisor write, pause, look up, ask her to clarify one detail, then write again. He didn't rush. He didn't soothe. He treated her words like evidence, not gossip. If you've ever sat in a room while somebody finally told the truth about what was happening behind closed doors and you felt both proud and sick at the same time, just leave a small heart in the comments. So, I know you understand that double feeling. Then it was Patrice's turn. A deputy moved closer to her chair while the supervisor stepped over. Her tone came out sharp, almost shrill now. "She's always been dramatic," Patrice insisted. "She cries over everything. If she had a bruise, it was from bumping into the table or dropping something. She gets emotional." She stretched that last word like it meant unreliable. The supervisor didn't react. "Did you ever see your son put his hands on her?" he asked. There was a pause. "Not in a way that wasn't normal," she said. "Sometimes a man has to remind his wife of her duties. That's marriage." The pen in his hand stopped moving for half a beat, then continued. "After that, he came to me, up close. I could see the dark stubble on his jaw, the faint coffee stain on his sleeve. Real man, long day. 'Miss Hayes,' he said, 'I need your statement. Start from when you walked in today. Only what you personally saw and heard.' So I did. I told him about the first thing I saw being my daughter on her knees. The way nobody looked up when I opened the door. The snapping fingers. The mop. The signature that shook across the page. I told him about the heat in her skin. The things she whispered in the corner about papers taken when she was too sick to fight. About nights she stayed awake to keep the floors shining for a man who liked power more than rest. I did not add extra. I did not soften. I gave him what belonged to my eyes and ears, and left out what came from my imagination. When I finished, he nodded once and closed his notebook. Then he walked to Derek. Up until then, Derek had been pacing by the door, arms folded tight across his chest, eyes darting from one cluster of conversation to another. The supervisor stopped a few feet away from him, leaving a pocket of space. "Mr. Wells," he said, "your turn. I want to hear your side." Derek huffed. "My side is simple," he said. "My wife has been under stress. She overreacts. She doesn't always remember things right. She grew up with her mother doing everything for her, and now she thinks being treated like an adult is abuse. She's unstable sometimes. Dramatic. You can't build a case of hurt feelings in a messy closet." He gestured vaguely toward the hallway. "She wanted to sleep near her cleaning supplies. Said it made her feel productive. Nobody forced her." The supervisor's face stayed neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "She says you held her wrist while she signed over access to the house," he said. "She says you've threatened to throw her out. She has recent injuries and no proper bedroom. You're telling me all of that is just stress?" Derek lifted his chin. "People say things in the heat of the moment," he replied. "If she didn't want to sign, she wouldn't have. She's not a child." She agreed. "You're letting an emotional woman and a guilty mother paint me into a corner." The word guilty hit, but I let it slide past. Guilt was my business to handle, not his to weaponize. The supervisor let a beat of silence stretch between them. When he spoke again, his voice had lost any trace of softness. "All right," he said. "If that's your position, then you won't mind us reviewing your financial records. Joint accounts, business accounts, transfers connected to this property, and any assets that came from Ms. Hayes originally." Derek's posture changed then. It was small, a tightening around his eyes, a slight shift of weight from one foot to the other. But I saw the panic flicker up behind his gaze before he buried it. "You can't just dig through my money because some woman is tired," he snapped. "You need a reason." The supervisor nodded once. "That's what we're building," he answered evenly. "And right now, given what we've seen and heard, we have enough to start." He glanced at the deputies. "Take Mr. Wells outside while we secure the scene and make some calls," he instructed. "He's not under arrest at this moment, but he doesn't need to be in the middle of this next part." One deputy stepped to Derek's left. Another to his right, not touching him but close enough that the line was clear. "This is my house," Derek said again, but there was less power in it now. They guided him toward the door, firm and professional. When it closed behind them, the sound didn't just cut off his voice. It sealed him on the wrong side of his own front step. They brought us outside like they were opening the house up to new air. The front yard had that late afternoon hush, the sky softening from blue toward gold, but my body didn't feel any of it. A patrol car idled at the curb, lights off for now, engine humming low. Derek stood near it with two deputies, arms folded, pacing in a tight line, talking fast. I made myself look away from him. He wasn't my assignment anymore. A folding clipboard appeared in the supervising officer's hand as he guided me toward the hood of another car parked in the driveway. "Miss Hayes," he said, "I'm going to take your full statement now, written and verbal. I know you're tired, but this part is important." I straightened my back. Tired or not, this was the one thing I knew how to do. Put events in order and stand by them. He handed me a pen and positioned the form under my hand, then clicked on a small recorder and set it between us. "Start from when you arrived at the residence today," he said. "Stick to what you saw and heard." So I did. I told him I stepped into the house and saw my daughter on her knees mopping a floor she already owned while her husband and mother-in-law sat on my furniture giving orders. I told him no one acknowledged me at first. How he snapped his fingers to make her move faster. How her hands shook on the mop handle. I described the way she flinched when I said her name. The bruises at the edge of her sleeve. The heat in her skin when I touched her arm. My handwriting stayed surprisingly neat as I wrote it all down, line after line. Years of filling out forms and contracts in strange offices had trained my hand not to wobble under pressure. He listened without interrupting, just nodding occasionally, asking me to repeat a word here or there so it would be clear on the recording. "You mentioned photographs earlier inside," he said when I paused. "You said you took some when you first arrived." "Before they really looked at me," I answered. I pulled out my phone like I was checking messages. I took 2 pictures of her, one from the doorway, one when she moved closer to the couch. I wanted proof of how she looked before anybody could say I was exaggerating. I scrolled to the photos and turned the screen so he could see. Kiara bent over the mop bucket, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. The Wells pair in the background like they were watching a show. The officer's jaw clenched just a fraction. "Can you email these to the address on this card?" he asked, slipping a small contact card from his pocket. "We'll back them up to the case file." "I'll do it now," I said. My fingers moved over the screen, forwarding the images while he noted the time and file names. If you're listening to me and you've ever reached a point where you stopped begging and started documenting, just drop a small heart in the comments. So, I know I'm not the only mother who learned to turn her pain into evidence. When I finished writing, he took the clipboard, glanced over my statement, then had me sign and date the bottom. "This lines up with what my deputies observed," he said quietly. "We're also going to get an official medical assessment for your daughter. Her condition is concerning." The words "concerning condition" were too small for what I'd seen in her eyes. But I understood he had to talk like a report, not a mother. "What happens now?" I asked. I kept my voice even. I wasn't asking for comfort. I needed a sequence. "Right now, we lock this down," he replied. "No one changes paperwork. No one moves money. No one moves her out of that house without us knowing. We're drafting an affidavit for an arrest warrant and additional search authority. My officers inside are finishing the scene notes." He glanced toward the front door where another deputy was moving in and out, carrying clipboards, talking briefly into his radio. "Financial Crimes Unit is already pulling what they can on the property and related accounts," he added. "They work fast when something smells off." I thought of Kiara's voice in the corner of that sitting room. The way it had thinned out around words like threat and street. And if I loved him, I would prove it. Something hard and cold settled deeper inside me. I wasn't running on rage anymore. This was a different fuel. "She's not going back in that closet tonight," I said. It wasn't a plea. It was a line I needed on record. He met my eyes. "Not if I have anything to say about it," he answered. His radio crackled. Then a short burst of static followed by a voice I didn't recognize. He lifted it to his ear, listening. "Copy," he said. "Send him out." A younger deputy stepped out of the house a moment later, moving with that focused urgency that meant he'd heard something worth carrying himself. He walked straight up to us, nodding at his supervisor before turning to me. "Ma'am," he said, catching his breath just a little. "Financial Crimes found something you'll want to hear." The younger deputy's words sat between us like they'd been wrapped in ice. "Financial Crimes found something you'll want to hear." His eyes flicked to me, then to the supervisor, then briefly toward the patrol car, where Derek still paced in the half-shadow of the flashing bar, hands cuffed in front now, not behind. "Not arrested but not free." The supervisor nodded once. Let's step back inside, he said. I want everyone who needs to hear this to hear it. My legs felt older than they had that morning, but I walked with them anyway, back through the doorway, past the entry rug I'd picked out from a catalog years ago, into the same sitting room where I first saw my daughter on her knees. Kiera sat on the edge of the couch now, arms wrapped around her middle, as if she were holding herself together from the outside in. Patrice stood near the far wall, one hand braced on a side table, mascara smudged under her eyes. My lawyer remained by the coffee table, documents still spread out in neat rows. The supervisor motioned the younger deputy forward. Tell them, he said. The deputy took out a small notebook, though it looked more like a prop for his memory than something he needed. We pulled records back 5 years, he began, starting with assets tied to Ms. Hayes and any subsequent transfers. The salon on Peachtree, I heard myself say. My heart squeezed when I heard the name. I pictured the soft yellow walls, the chairs I'd saved months to buy, the mirror where I watched Kiera learn to braid hair like it was a prayer. That property was sold 4 years ago, he continued. The bill of sale shows your daughter, Miss Hayes. He nodded toward me. As the legal seller, large lump sum, signatures check out as hers. I nodded once. This part somehow didn't surprise me anymore. I had felt something missing in her voice even in those short, scatter calls back then. Where did it go? I asked. The money. He glanced down at his notes. That's where it gets interesting, he said. The funds were deposited into a joint account opened by Kiera and Patrice Wells. Every head in the room turned toward Patrice. Her lips parted. I was helping her manage things. She cut in quickly. She didn't know how to handle that kind of money. She asked me to. 3 days after the deposit, the deputy continued, not raising his voice. A large portion of that money was transferred into an account labeled Medical Reserve. The memo lines mentioned cancer treatment. The word hit me like a slap I hadn't seen coming. I heard it again, this time in Kiera's voice. The way she used to say it on the phone, soft and rushed. Asterisk Patrice is sick. Serious. They're saying cancer. Asterisk my fingers dug into my palm. We checked with the hospital listed in the memo, the deputy went on. Their system has no record of Patrice Wells ever being admitted, consulted, or treated for cancer. No oncology visits, no imaging, nothing matching the dates or amounts. The room tilted just a little. The deputy's words kept going. We also cross-checked outpatient clinics and local specialists. Same result. There's no medical paper trail to match where that money was supposed to go. For a moment, nobody spoke. The lie sat there exposed, ugly and raw. Patrice's face went slack, then tightened again. Not every illness goes through insurance, she snapped. We paid cash. Private doctor. You don't know everything about my body. Even now, she tried to pull privacy like a curtain over her dishonesty. The supervisor's gaze didn't waver. We'll be requesting full documentation, he said. Invoices, prescriptions, anything to support that claim. Right now, all we see is a large business sale, a transfer, and no matching medical records. My lawyer stepped in then, his voice gentle but edged. Kiera, he said quietly, turning toward my daughter. When you sold that salon, did you do it because you believed Patrice was sick? Her whole body flinched at hearing her name. She looked like someone had just opened a door she'd been pressing her back against for years. She said she was dying, Kiera whispered. Her hands gripped her knees, fingers digging into the thin fabric. She said the insurance wouldn't cover everything. She didn't want to be a burden on Derek. She cried. She said God wouldn't forgive me if I let her go to the grave knowing I had money and wouldn't help. The words started spilling faster now like a dam had cracked. I didn't tell you, Mama, she sobbed. I was so ashamed. I knew you gave me that shop to stand on my own. I didn't want you to think I was weak or ungrateful. She told me not to call you. She said you were busy with your new life. And this was my chance to prove I could make sacrifices, like you used to. Her shoulders shook. So I signed it away. The chairs, the mirrors, the regulars who used to ask about you. All of it. I sold your gift to save her. Her voice broke on that last word. My chest ached in a way no plane ride, no boardroom, no empty hotel room had ever managed to reach. Betrayal wrapped around grief, but not at her. Never at her. Patrice's eyes darted wildly now, like she was searching for a version of the story that made her look less monstrous. I was sick, she insisted. I had symptoms. The doctor said it might be cancer. We were preparing. With no follow-up? My lawyer asked quietly. No records? No treatment? She didn't answer. The supervisor drew in a slow breath and let it out. The silence that followed felt different from all the others that day. This one carried decision. He turned toward the doorway where Derek had been brought back inside just in time to hear his mother's lie laid bare. Rage sat on his face, but for the first time, some of it looked like it wasn't aimed at us. Between the physical evidence, the witness statements, the fraudulent use of medical claims to obtain funds, and the coercive control over this property, the supervisor said, voice level, "We're past suspicion." He nodded once to his deputies. "Place him under arrest." They moved fast once the words left his mouth. "Place him under arrest." One deputy stepped in behind Derek, another to his side. The sound of handcuffs coming off a belt is small, but that day it sounded like the closing of a chapter. Metal met skin, then clicked shut around his wrists. He jerked once, instinctive, but there was nowhere for him to go. "You can't be serious," he barked. "For what?" "For taking care of what your daughter abandoned." The supervisor didn't flinch. "You're being placed under arrest on suspicion of domestic battery, fraud, and financial exploitation," he said evenly. "You'll have a chance to speak with an attorney. For now, you need to stop talking and start walking." They read him his rights as they turned him toward the front door. I watched his shoulders, the same shoulders that had lounged across my couch like the world belonged to him, now pulled tight with tension. As he passed Kiera, he twisted his head, eyes burning into her. "You did this," he hissed. "You and your guilty mama." She recoiled like the words were a hand raised against her. I stepped between them before the echo of it could settle. "No," I said quietly. "You did this when you forgot she was a person and not your property." Patrice lunged forward then, reaching for Derek's arm as they guided him away. "You can't take my son like some criminal," she cried. "He's a good man. We're family. This is a misunderstanding." The supervisor turned toward her. His eyes were tired but clear. "Ma'am," he said, "based on what we found so far, you're also being detained for questioning on fraud and participation in financial exploitation. You'll need to come with us." She froze for the first time all day. She seemed to understand that the net she helped string around my daughter's life had threads leading back to her own ankles. When the second pair of cuffs closed around her wrists, she didn't fight. She just kept repeating, "I was sick. I was sick," to nobody who believed her. They led them both out onto the front lawn. The sun had dropped lower, brushing everything in a soft gold that didn't match the hardness of what was happening. Neighbors had started to gather on the sidewalk, drawn by the patrol cars and the uniforms. Curtains twitched. Phones appeared in hands. A man across the street folded his arms and watched, expression unreadable. A woman 2 houses down clutched a grocery bag to her chest, eyes wide. If you're listening to me and you've ever seen someone who thought they were untouchable walk past their own neighbors in handcuffs, just drop a small heart in the comments. So, I know you understand that strange mix of justice and grief. Derek tried to pull his shoulders back as if he could still pose while walking in chains, but the cuffs changed everything. He couldn't swing his arms, couldn't point, couldn't grab. He could only walk, each step marked by the soft jangle of metal. Patrice kept her head down, hair falling forward, robe no longer regal in the afternoon light. The deputies guided them into separate vehicles, doors opening and closing with heavy, final sounds. Kiera stood just behind me on the porch, one hand braced against the doorframe. I could feel her trembling through the space between us as the engines started and the cars pulled away. Her breath sped up, then stalled. "They're really going," she whispered. It was like she didn't trust her own eyes. "They're actually gone for now," I said. "I didn't put sugar on it. They'll have hearings, lawyers. They'll try to twist things." Her hand flew to her mouth. "What if they come back?" she asked, voice cracking. "What if he gets out and he's angry? What if they find some way to take everything again? I don't have the shop anymore. I don't have—" She cut herself off, swallowing a sob. I turned to face her fully in the doorway. Behind us, the house waited, silent, still full of ghosts that were finally starting to move out. "Listen to me," I said softly. "This is the last time you'll ask that question." Standing on someone else's script. She blinked at me, confusion mixing with fear. I reached into my bag and pulled out the contingency file, the same one that had started as a what-if in a quiet law office years ago. The cardboard was warm from being held so long. I placed it carefully in her hands. She stared down at it like it might burn her. "What is this?" she whispered. "Insurance," I said. "Not the kind they sell over the phone. The kind a mother writes when she knows she can't be 2 places at once." I tapped the cover lightly. "Your name is on those pages. So is mine. Every signature, every clause, every protection we built into this house is sitting in your hands right now." Her fingers tightened around the file. She looked up, eyes shining with something new that hadn't been there hours ago. Something like the beginning of belief. "But what if it's not enough?" she asked. "What if they find another way?" I stepped closer, close enough to see my own reflection in her pupils, older and more tired than I remembered, but still standing. "Baby," I said, my voice steady, "this house was always yours. They just thought you were alone." It was almost dark when she finally stood in front of that door. The master bedroom had been at the end of the hallway since the day this house was built. But to Kiera it looked like a country she didn't have a passport for. Her bare feet hovered on the line where the hallway met the bedroom carpet, like crossing it. Might wake up ghosts. The deputies were gone. The cars had rolled away. The house was quiet in a way I'd never heard before. No television, no orders, no heavy footsteps meant to make someone flinch. Just the soft hum of the air conditioner and our breathing. Her fingers tightened around the contingency file pressed to her chest. "You sure I can go in?" she asked. It broke my heart that she needed to ask permission to step into a room with her own name on the deed. I leaned against the opposite wall, not touching her. Close enough for her to feel I was there. "You don't need my permission," I said. "But yes, I'm sure. Open it." She reached for the knob like it might burn her. Turned smoothly under her hand. Something flickered in her eyes. Surprise. Then something like anger that it had always been this easy and still felt so impossible. She pushed the door open. The room smelled faintly of fabric softener and a perfume I didn't recognize. Something sharp and floral. The bedspread was different from the one I'd picked years ago. Patrice's taste stamped over mine. But the bones of the room were the same. Big windows, high ceiling, the headboard I paid for in cash. Kiera stepped inside like she was walking into a photograph she'd seen of herself, but couldn't remember posing for. Her gaze moved across the walls, up to the ceiling fan, down to the nightstands. Then it landed on the far side of the room where a stack of plastic bins and taped boxes sat, pushed against the wall, half hidden behind a garment rack. "Those weren't there before," she murmured. I pushed off the wall and joined her. My body slow but steady. "The officers pulled them out from the attic access," I said. "They said your things were crammed up there on top of old Christmas decor. I asked them to set them aside." I watched her absorb that, the fact that someone had decided her life belonged in a crawl space. She walked toward the boxes like she was afraid they might disappear if she moved too fast. One of them had her name scrolled on it in a handwriting that wasn't hers. Another was labeled old stuff. Like her memories were clutter. She knelt and peeled back the tape on the nearest one. Inside, her wedding dress lay folded in on itself, the lace wrinkled and dull. On top of it sat a small box. I recognized it before she even opened it. The set of gold combs I'd given her the morning she got married. Engraved with her initials. "I thought these were lost," she whispered. She lifted one out, running her thumb along the letters. He said, "We misplaced them in the move." She set the comb down gently and reached deeper. Out came a stack of journals, their covers worn at the corners. She opened one at random. Her eyes moved quickly over the page, then slowed. Her mouth trembled. "This was the last thing I wrote before he took the papers," she said. I was scared, but I still sounded like me. She turned the book toward me. On the page, in neat, looping handwriting that didn't shake, she'd written about plans for the salon. Ideas for a community braiding class. A note to call me on Sunday. I felt something twist inside my chest. If you're still with me and you've ever watched someone you love find a younger version of themselves trapped on a page, drop a heart in the comments so I know I'm not the only mother who's seen that kind of grief. Kiera pressed the journal to her chest, then set it aside with careful fingers. She moved from box to box, shawls barely worn, a framed photo from her wedding, her smile wide, eyes bright, the edge of my hat visible on the side. Patrice and Derek had kept the frame, but tucked it away up here like the version of her with hope was bad for business. "They took everything that reminded me I had a life before them," she said quietly. "Not just stuff, thoughts, plans, even my name. He started calling me girl when he was mad. She called me that child when she talked about me to neighbors, like I wasn't in the room." She stood slowly, looking around the master bedroom again. I forgot what it felt like to have a door I could close, where no one was allowed unless I said so. I walked to the bed and sat on the edge, patting the space beside me. "You remember now," I said. "This room doesn't belong to his voice or hers. It belongs to the woman whose name is on every honest piece of paper tied to this house." She joined me, her shoulders sagging, the file still clutched in one hand. I took it gently, set it on the nightstand. "You won't be sleeping in that closet again," I told her. "If you wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for a mop, you'll sit right here until your body understands the war is over." Her throat worked around a sound that didn't quite become a sob. Tears finally spilled over, running down in 2 clean tracks. "I don't know how to live without listening for his footsteps," she admitted. "I don't know how to relax in a room without wondering what I'll pay for it later." I laid my hand over hers, the same hand that had signed away too much under someone else's threats, and squeezed. "You don't have to know tonight," I said. "You just have to know you're allowed to find out." She turned her head to look at me. For the first time since I stepped back into Georgia, I saw her. The girl who used to dance in the salon after closing, singing off-key while she swept hair into piles. Bruised, thinner, but still there. "Mom," Her voice shook, but the words were clear. I want to live again. Tell me how. I brushed a tear from her cheek with my thumb, then folded her fingers around the edge of the comforter, anchoring her to the bed that was hers. Start tonight, I said softly. You're home. What would you have done in my place seeing your child like that? Or maybe you've faced a battle to reclaim what was rightfully yours or someone else's. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.